Sweet. We got several more. Welcome, everybody. We'll get started in a moment. I can start sharing my screen now. We're streaming this on YouTube as well. Just so you know, the broader topic is about performance paradox. I'm going to just add this is Partytown edition, boosting your performance. Get my little chat widgets up. Just a reminder too, so there's a Q&A functionality here in the Zoom webinar, which is pretty awesome because your questions will get highlighted and we can answer them in the chat. We can answer them live. When they've been responded to, they'll get marked done. So it's more likely your question won't get missed. You could chat with us in the panel. We'll be trying to just watch it the entire time and make sure we answer burning questions. I'll be zooming around an Excalibur board with these fun drawings and visuals for this cool stuff. We'll have Adam and Mishko answering questions as they come up. I'll be firing some, we'll be answering yours. And why don't I go ahead and just start jumping into stuff. So as a really quick background, actually, and I want to make sure we know everybody here. Right? We didn't do intros last time, so let's cover that really briefly too. So hi, I'm Steve. I'm co-founder and CEO of Builder. We make this visual development platform. Basically, think about a Figma that connects right to your code, where you can just drag and drop with your components of your code within your stack, right? Next.js site, spin up pages right in there with Builder, API-driven, visual editing, this and that. We have Mishko and Adam here. Why don't we just have you both do your own intros? Mishko, introduce yourself real quick, and then we'll pop to Adam.
Hi, I'm Mishko, CTO at Builder. Done this thing called Done this thing called Angular, and now doing this thing called Quick and Builder, and helping basically developers make awesome websites. Adam?
And I'm Adam Bradley, previously with Ionic Framework and Stencil.js, and currently with Builder working on Partytown and Quick.
Awesome. So we'll be covering a little bit of the background, dive into Partytown, and Amir and Charles, thanks for saying hi. And again, we're live, so please, everybody, make use of the chat. That makes it a lot more fun and makes use of this not just being recording, like we're right here to talk to you. So, I mean, here's the gist. I'll give one bit of background. We touched on this last time, so I'll do it briefly now. Web performance. We have all kinds of tools out there. We make one ourselves. The big question always is, why is my website not 100 out of 100 on PageSpeed Insights? And if not, how do I get it to be? And the big thing is we keep finding repeatedly that it's JavaScript that's weighing us down. The amount of JavaScript on websites is increasing over time. CPU speeds are not. CPU cores are, but JavaScript is a single threaded language. It runs. You will not use multiple threads in JavaScript, well, at least without a secret we're about to show you. So we find time and again, if you take any average website and just rip out the JavaScript, it shoots up in performance. Last time we covered a little bit of the broader data on that and how we're seeing this across websites. And this is just an obvious culprit that not enough people are talking about. And that might be because not many people have good solutions, right? When people have a solution, they'll talk to you about the problem. When they don't, either people don't want to hear it or it makes them look bad because many people out there are contributors to the problem. Many platforms, many frameworks, this and that. And so we talked a bit about how, hey, if you want your code to deliver in a way that's HTML first, JavaScript when needed, Quick is the framework for that. We went deep last time. You can catch the recording, and we'll have more sessions going deeper on that. Today, we want to talk about Partytown, which is you can move your website to Quick. In fact, we did that for the Builder website, and instantly we got crushed by third-party scripts. So we made the site itself 100 out of 100, and then we added all the third-party scripts we needed, and it went back to like 50. I forget the exact number, but it was ugly. And so that came the inspiration for Partytown. But I'll just add briefly one more thing, which we'll cover in a future time, is the Builder platform, right? A website at the end of the day needs to be able to run very, very quickly. So we know that's minimal JavaScript and you're serving content extremely fast. You need to have third-party scripts. You're not going to get away from that. We like to pretend it's not the case, but it is. And you need a way to power content, right? You need a composable solution to build out stuff and to power non-trivial things, analytics, personalization, A/B testing. And so that's what the Builder platform touches on, but we will actually go deeper on Partytown now. And Partytown is completely free. Great question. Please keep throwing them at us. Also keep in mind too, anybody using the chat, by default, it selects hosts and panelists only. Like Adam, for instance, I think he said hi only to us instead of everybody. There's a little toggle to chat with everybody. And we keep messing that up. I was messing up last time too. I think Mishko also, you answered the question in a way that only is visible. There we go, fixed. We're learning how to do this. This is our second stream ever. We intend to do this every week. But anyway, back to the program. Let's talk about Partytown. So I'm going to zoom out and skip some of this fun, quick stuff. Catch the last one if you want to see it. But where we left off last time is you can build a website with Quick and get just incredible performance, right? I'm being conservative and say 9400 is pretty achievable and easy. And we even have amazing stuff like use your React components within Quick. It's awesome. Check it out. We'll talk more on it. You're welcome to ask questions on it. Let's remember this question about fresh versus quick, actually, because I think that's a good one once we talk a bit about Partytown to come back to. Short answer is quick performs better. The longer answer is fresh is very cool too. So we'll come back to that. It's islands versus resumability. It's a good one. So please, everybody, help me not forget. But basically, we landed here on you can control of the code you can control, which is the code you write. You can have it deliver insanely fast and not bog down performance. And again, when we're talking performance scores, we're not talking about Lighthouse on your M1 desktop connected to a gigabit Ethernet. We're actually genuinely talking about real world conditions, an imperfect mobile device on an imperfect network, which Google's PageSpeed Insights does a pretty good job emulating, that thing that you're probably plagued by because it tells you all these improvements you need to make on your site. And it tells you if your SEO will be dinged because you don't pass Core Web Vitals. That's what we're talking about on performance scores. Oh yeah, Dino and Quick. Okay, we have good questions coming in. And in fact, actually, Nikhil, if you can put your question in the Q&A spot, that'll help us make sure we get to it. It could get lost in chat, but the Q&A sort of section feature will help us hold it there. But we really want to keep centered on, so to start on Partytown, and we want to keep centered on, we want both performance and functionality, right? This idea of, and I've seen it on Twitter recently, you get one or the other. You get a fast site, but it can't have any functionality, or you get a slow site with functionality is truly a silly way of looking at the problem, genuinely. And it's been the case for a while because these things are hard to solve. And while Quick handles the first party code, you will find that as soon as you add third party code, which is not code you control, you can't rewrite Google Analytics very easily. And I'm not sure they document the APIs that they're using for that. You'll end up here, a huge bog down of third party scripts that are hurting your performance. And what do you do about it? So we really genuinely came to the conclusion that if it's not your code, you can't do anything about it. All we need to do is get this code off of the main thread, right? When JavaScript's running on the main thread of your browser, users can't interact, layouts can't happen, things are frozen, and your code can't execute too. I mean, at some point, you're going to need JavaScript to execute, obviously as little as possible, as late as possible in a sense, but it's going to have to happen, and you don't want third-party scripts in the way. So what Partytown does, which is pretty incredible, I don't have that one cool visual. Anyway, sorry, we're missing a cool visual that I usually have, but this is a good starting point too, is Partytown is able to shift all that code to a web worker, right? Now, the thing is, if you want it off the main thread, there's only two places it can go. It could go to another machine entirely, which people have explored. Can you run third-party scripts at the edge with emulated browsers? That gets very costly, very complicated, and pretty impossible to just drop in and support the average third-party script. As you might know, that's the complicating factor for running third-party scripts in web workers as well, because that third-party script was written for the main thread. It's going to access window and document and other things. Those things are not in the web worker thread, in the web worker environment. And so what's exciting here is Partytown solves that. It's extremely lightweight. It's not emulating DOM or anything heavyweight like that. The code that you decide to run in Partytown, such as Google Analytics or other things, will run by default in the web worker. And when needed, when there's a single, and it's usually pretty rare, these third-party scripts are usually just running basic business logic, but occasionally need to see what is the document cookie, what is the window title, basic information, occasionally listen to an event, like if the document's clicked, let's save an analytics, tracked events. And so for those little bits that the main thread is needed, Partytown can allow that access. And it's in a way you control as well, which is cool. But the question is, how in the world do you do that, right? The big key issue is the web worker is asynchronous. It cannot access the main thread synchronously. The browser does not allow that. And so somehow we need synchronous access to the main thread so that code as written by somebody else will just work. So that's where, and I'm going to give a very high level sort of description, and then we can dive in with Adam to answer some of the details on how this works. But the very high level description is we are proxying these global variables and sort of the well-known ones. And these are the commonly used ones. So when you're accessing the window and you're trying to get window dot something, we can actually intercept and send that somewhere else. Now, the thing here is this sort of get from main thread idea also does need to happen synchronously, yet under the hood, the main thread access is asynchronous. So that comes back to the, oh, good question. What do proxies do? I'll answer that briefly first. That's very, very relevant to what we're talking about. Proxies allow you to create a wrapper around a JavaScript object so that instead of when you access a property or call a method, instead of it running on the source object, you can actually intercept, get property, set property, function call, and other basic things and handle the behavior as you choose. This is something that Quick uses for state management, which is inspired by like Solid.js and Vue. So Vue uses proxies. So when you update state, it can observe that the state object was updated and update your UI views. Quick does a very similar technique, Solid.js as well. And so it's just a simple way to make an object behave differently in ways that you can customize. So in our case, there isn't actually a window object. We need to provide, are you getting something? Are you setting something? We need to decide how that behavior actually happens. And you can look up on MDN for some more resources on that. So in this case, we're back to that big question. Proxy access needs to be synchronous. Main thread access has to be asynchronous. How do you resolve that? And so we found something. Adam specifically found something. So back in the day in web browser land, and yes, proxies are completely seamless. Sorry, question coming in, Mishko's answering too, but that one's very relevant as well. Do proxies work seamlessly? Yes. Now, it depends on how you implement them, but they can be a very seamless wrapper over the source object functionality, which is why Partytown is able to do what it does. But back here, so way back in the day, when the idea of XML HTTP requests were first introduced to browsers, they had an option to make the request synchronous. So the entire browser would lock and a request was made to a remote resource, pulled back, and then the JavaScript execution would continue. If I remember right, that's what, Adam, am I correct? That's what the false argument in this code example does, right?
Yeah, it was kind of the original option was you didn't have that third argument. And then when they realized this probably isn't a good idea, let's make sure that we can have it be asynchronous. That's where they added the other argument to then set the true, which is what you should be doing almost always, or basically always on the main thread. You don't want to lock up the browser and have the person staring at a locked screen while this is trying to download something, which could take a second, could take 10 seconds. We don't know.
Exactly. When it's locked, you can't interact. No other code can run. It's that you should never do this on the main thread, which relates to this other question that came in. Does this play well with feature policy, sync XHR rule? And that's a thing. Synchronous XHRs are deprecated on the main thread. They should never be used for any reason on the main thread, because when you freeze the main thread, the user cannot interact, no code could run, bad things happen. It has been explicitly decided by these groups, though, that in the worker thread, that actually is okay. Synchronous XHRs are not deprecated in the worker thread. And we've talked to various teams, Chrome, et cetera. They have no known plans to deprecate this because of that very reason. If you spawn workers and your worker freezes, that's fine. The user can interact, code can run on the main thread, code can run in other workers. They're assuming that we are being smart and deliberate and doing this for a good reason. And it's not an obvious problem for the main thread. Oh, good. Yes. So people are noticing only in the worker do we do the synchronous XHR.
Correct.
So that's how we get away with this, right? In the worker. And that's the big hypothesis here, right? Is the third-party script. If the third-party script freezes for a brief moment every once in a while, like who cares? Like your Google Analytics events tracks a millisecond slower than if it had the main thread. In most cases, the sense is, who cares, right? If the user interaction respond more slowly, that'd be a problem. But remember, third-party scripts, especially the type you should probably use on your website, are usually pretty passive. They listen to events, they send HTTP requests. Now Google knows how people are browsing your site. Generally, we would still recommend being careful or even avoiding third-party scripts that affect the UI, things that are rendering forms and other stuff. That's not always going to play nicely in Partytown, given this thread hopping that needs to happen. And that's not going to play nicely on the main thread either. That's going to really slow things down. So that's yours to choose. But the classical third-party script that we can't avoid runs nicely here. Now, as you can see, we're making a request to some bogus place called Partytown. And that's the other clever trick here is Partytown is not a real path that exists. And so we also install a service worker. The service worker looks at request for Partytown and goes, oh, wait, you want something that's actually from the main thread. Then at that point, we're in asynchronous land. The worker is frozen and waiting. So synchronous execution is still happening. But now in the service worker, we can just post a message to the main thread. Hey, give me the value of window location href. Hey, give me a reference to an object. Give me whatever. And then we can respond and shoot it back. And so that's where you, to rewind, get right back into this. So in this example, code's running in the worker. When you touch window.location, we're freezing the worker thread. We're going to the service worker, it goes to the main thread, gets the values, returns it. Now your third-party code continues. The net effect here is third parties literally become free. So when we looked at these bad scores, if you put all these scripts in Partytown, assuming they're not coming in and cramming content into the DOM, which we find is exceptionally rare, depending on the type of tool used, but let's assume third-party analytics, stuff like that, this problem gets completely wiped out. Like there is literally no performance impact anymore. This score, if it's brought to 29 just because of third-party scripts, if we put it all in the web worker thread via Partytown, there's zero cost now. These are all for free. Your score shoots back to 100. That's how the builder site is 100 out of 100 on PageSpeed Insights Mobile as a result. So going back over here, just to wrap up the background, how does Partytown work? It's really simple. You add a tiny snippet on the main thread so that you can, we can add that magic that then finds the right scripts and shoots them to the web worker thread that we create. And then you take any script and just add type equals text/Partytown. So once the snippet's installed, you can choose what scripts run in Partytown. And that's maybe a good time. Yeah. And we'll talk about gotchas in 1 minute, but that's where we've been able to find this, right? Like the builder website. Oh, it's an older screenshot. We're redesigning it right now. If anybody's feedback on a redesign, tell me. I think it's good, but we love people's input. But basically, that's where you end up with this holy grail end result. Google PageSpeed Insights Mobile, 95 plus out of 100 performance score, and no loss of functionality, right? Our website uses A/B test, personalization, interactivity, unlimited, third-party scripts, tons of complicated first-party code. It's generated by builders. There's tons of no-code generation. And oh, thank you, Charles. Yes, I like the color scheme too. So I'm really glad to hear that. It's a comment on our new branding. And forgive me for those tuning into YouTube live. I should very much be reading these questions. I'll try to remember to do that so everybody knows what I'm responding to. But anyway, Quick and Partytown can deliver these insane performance results. And again, the really interesting and critical part is over time, as your website grows in complexity, marketing team needs a dozen more third-party scripts, or your development team adds tons of more functionality, the bar is flat. The performance never gets worse. Generally speaking, more functionality, more scripts slows down performance over time. So like example.com is always fast, but then when you have your hello world site, it's probably still fast. But then when you have a complicated site, it's slow. With Quick and Partytown, you no longer have those issues. Let me talk quickly about gotchas, and I'd love to also address a lot of these questions. I know Mishko's throwing in quick answers so people can see answers in real time, but I'd love to go back over them and make sure we answer many of these live as well, especially for those tuning into YouTube. And so just so you know, a couple gotchas. Test incrementally. This is still beta software, and if you find you put a script in Partytown and it's throwing an error or something unexpected, that's a good one to be aware of and say, okay, maybe file an issue on GitHub and continue sort of using Partytown for other scripts that don't have that. And that's about the main one. If you'd like to know other gotchas, we can let Adam chime in, but I'd love to sort of pause here and start answering some questions, probably starting with Partytown, and we'll have Adam answer most of these, and then we'll get some of the quick ones too. So I'll fire some of these off to you, Adam. Let me just look through what's a good starter.
Try to answer like the obvious ones.
Yeah, no, this is good. And I think others will want to know too. So let's get Adam to be able to speak to some of them as well. So first one, I'll just read it as is. Performance overhead from workers like the web worker and the service worker and the main thread communication. What do we have to worry about there? So Adam, is there a cost in transferring some of the stuff from the worker thread to the main thread and back? Should we worry about it? What are your thoughts?
I would say the performance cost would be no, but there is a probably a time cost of rather the go in between the two different threads is usually 2 or 3, 5 milliseconds go in between it, which again, like to Steve's point, for certain analytics or really most analytics, that really doesn't matter because things are passive. They are asynchronous. They do just kind of handle clicks as user clicks them. And then that information is batched up and eventually sent to some server somewhere. And so the nature of the entire analytics world is kind of asynchronous in general. So it works well in things like situations like that. Where it's more difficult is something that's built with a lot of DOM manipulations. Basically, it's building up this large SVG, and it does so by get attribute, set attribute, get style, set style. There's all these different DOM operations. And so as it's building those, you got to consider each of those operations is a 3 millisecond hop. And so you might see that UI slowly get built if there's thousands of operations, which isn't that far-fetched. So it really kind of depends. You can't just say like yes or no. Certain things can work, and even certain UI analytics would work great. It just depends on how they built it. If it was one big DOM operation and they sent it over in one bash, and that's great. It's going to work well. If it's doing it with lots of back and forth, then that's probably not the best ideas. But from what we found, things like Google Analytics is perfect for Partytown.
Yeah, and to build on that too, and it relates to, I think we can answer a few questions in one here too, or at least touch on some that were brought up that Michiko gave some good answers to in the chat. But yeah, so can Partytown access the document and the window and the DOM? Yes. Do you want it to? It's okay if it's a little bit. So Google Analytics might access a couple of things. That's fine. Will you notice a notable delay in sending events to Google Analytics? 2 milliseconds shouldn't be a problem. Usually it's just a fire on a click and very basic things. But like Adam said, do you want to be running React in Partytown? Probably not, because there's a lot of hot back and forth. And so stuff rendering, lots of stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. And that gets brought up a lot of like, oh, this is great. Why don't I put my entire application inside of Partytown? It's like, that's actually purposely not the point. Like, we want to dedicate the main thread to your code, right? So that you can do all you want. You can use all the resources you want in the main thread, be as fast as possible, access the DOM as fast as possible. And then it's the third-party scripts that like, all right, this is kind of background stuff. Let's throw it into the other thread so we don't mess with our main app. And so it's purposely designed where we want it to run in background. So like, you really don't want to put your application inside of Partytown.
Exactly. And so actually this relates to, there's an answer live button. I don't know what that does. Cool. Oh, I see. That's interesting. Sorry, I'm looking at there's buttons we choose to answer live versus in chat. So I clicked answer live on one. So Adam, to expand on this a little bit, the question is, are there any third-party vendors that this wouldn't work for? What would you not recommend if you have specifics or just generalizations to put in Partytown?
Yeah, I think definitely UI heavy stuff. And what I found, so Wistia is a video service, kind of like YouTube or something like that. That one does work, but I didn't see the benefits of it being worthwhile. And so you are able to actually, everything that you want about a video can work within the web worker. It's got to go back and forth so many times. And while a video is playing, there's so many back and forth that's happening. It's like, are you still playing? Are you still playing? And so there's so much interaction between the two different threads that I don't think that one is worthwhile. Something like, was it Twitter embed actually does have a lot of DOM operations. It's amazing that a tweet, which is, however many characters, if you look at the network tab, it's about 2 megabytes of code, 3 megabytes of code to get a tweet iframe to show up on your page. And so that one still blows my mind that's acceptable. But that's a good case of like, it is UI, but it's better to run that into the web worker, so you can kind of offload that 2 megabyte download onto your web worker and not the main thread. So again, it really is tough to just have a blanket statement of true or false, like this is good for that or not. So the other thing that's been purposely designed in Partytown is it's an opt-in feature. It's not just like it magically optimizes all scripts. It's like, I want to pick and choose this script. I know it's going to work well. Let's try this one. I see analytics is working fine. Let's try this next one. And so you might be able to decide which ones you do and do not want to run through Partytown.
Exactly. And so I would say our general recommendation, there's a related question that I can touch on. Our general recommendation is, let me scroll way back. Sorry if I'm making anybody dizzy, is looking at these two areas. We could even rephrase it and say UI code should be in quick, right? Or think of it more broadly, code that displays stuff to your end users, components that render DOM that really needs to be in your code, right? There truly is hard constraints in the browser environment where you should not have like Twitter as a 2 megabyte third-party script rendering to your DOM. the DOM rendering should come from your framework, ideally a framework like Quick or even Astro or Marco, things that can deliver pure HTML. React server components is a little bit in that vein. And that way you can ensure that, it's all native to your framework and as fast as can be. When you start introducing other rendering systems, right? You're embedding, even I'll pick on web components for a minute. If you install a web component, it's going to be rendered through something else, installing some other rendering system out there in the world. When you have a website that's assembling in the browser and all kinds of rendering systems are fired, that's not the dream of sending this fully pre-serialized, pre-rendered page that hits you and is as performant as possible. So we definitely say if something's rendering to the DOM, that really does need to be in your code for good performance. If something is passive, like analytics, conversion, stuff like that, you're not going to have the option to rewrite that most likely anyway. Like you could write your own Twitter card with Twitter APIs. People recommend that. But you're not going to have a good time trying to rewrite Google Analytics. So Partytown's an awesome solution. And it's worth touching on, and it relates to this too. Another question that's really good. Well, how does this work with something like Google Optimize? So Google Optimize goes back to that same problem. Google Optimize or others that use this sort of script injection strategy. So anybody who's not familiar, what Google Optimize does is it gives you a visual editor of your website. You can choose sort of changes you want to make. So you can say, I'll make an A/B test group where I change a piece of text. And then what it does is it adds blocking JavaScript to the head of your site. It looks up the mutations you want to make, and then at runtime injects those onto the page. Now, as you know, we don't ever want to block the main thread. We talked about blocking, XML HTTP requests, blocking external requests. Blocking scripts is the exact same vein. You will never see performance advice suggesting to use blocking scripts. It's very, very bad. Emphasis, imagine I said 100 varies. It's very, very, very bad. And so, okay, what if you put that in Partytown? Well, that introduces a new problem. The very nature of this idea that external things will modify your page in a synchronous way does not play nicely in Partytown. So there's a different solution for this. If you put Google Optimize in Partytown, it'll lazily make those modifications. So you'll see your page more instantly, and then the text or image or whatever A/B test variations will flash in suddenly, which is really bad. That's actually exactly why we made Builder. That's why we consider this the last piece to this puzzle, is you need a tool that has a visual editor like Google Optimize, but it must be native to your tech stack. It must deliver from the edge, from the API, from the CDN. This idea of these workaround and in solutions just aren't effective for performance. So that's why that's built into the Builder platform, so that when you're creating this content, you can build the A/B test groups in, and then that's delivered dynamically. So that's another one just worth sort of mentioning and touching on. Here's a good one for you, Adam. This one just came into the chat, but we have tons of service worker events coming in from /Proxytown in the network tag. Even on first page load. Is that expected, or did they do something wrong?
Nope, that is expected, and that is nothing to worry about. Because really what's happening, it's all being handled locally by that browser. So it's not an actual network request. My one wish would be that those don't have to show up into network requests, because they're really not. I mean, they're really just, it's locally handled by the service worker. So the service worker intercepts it and then handles it. So it's kind of it's a part that trips up a lot of people. It's like, oh, there's hundreds of things happening, but really it's just hundreds of DOM operations that you're seeing. So those things were always happening. If anything, they were fighting for resources and blocking layouts in the past, but now you're just able to visually see it in the network tab. And that's the service worker route. So the other one is to use Atomics. And we have that all documented, and that's a whole nother story of how Atomics would work. But Atomics would be silent, just like a normal DOM operation. It would actually be 10 times faster and a smaller build. But if you go to the Partytown site and read the docs, you'll see there's some other gotchas with that too.
Yeah, and just so you know, the future of Partytown looks to be, we hope without doubt, Atomics. Atomics are lighter, faster. They don't pollute your network tab with additional requests. And really is like the proper way in a browser to lock the thread momentarily, shoot out, and then continue. That's definitely where we see things going. It's just currently browser support for it is a little bit wacky. And we feel confident it will improve, but we know with standards and browser evolution, it takes time. So we're sitting and waiting for that to happen. And we think things will get even better, even faster, all that stuff over time, which we're excited about. And there's even a lot of chatter, mostly just requests, not much commentary from the browser standards people but a lot of people are just asking, why is this not built into the browser? And our answer is, we wish it was, and we want it to be. So like many things, if our work and research and development here influences future browser standards, we'd be very proud and very happy. If the day comes where this is no longer a problem and we don't even have to be building this, we would be just as happy. I want to answer one other one in here. So the more of a comment. Okay, yeah, it's a question. So setting up a reverse proxy. Let me actually explain that momentarily. JavaScript files, when sent to the browser, don't need to have CORS headers, access control, allow origin, stuff like that. You can include script tags with a source from any domain. It does not need to include those headers that specify, any domain is allowed to fetch this. How Partytown works is it actually uses fetch, because we need to actually grab the script contents and evaluate it in the worker thread in a unique way, not the normal script tag way. That means when you're using fetch to request JavaScript, the rules of fetch apply, which is if it's coming from another CDN, which most third-party scripts will be, if not all, you need that CDN to return that access control allow origin star, whatever, like your origin is allowed to fetch this. So one other sort of gotcha with Partytown is you need to have a proxy. And so the question here is, so setting up a reverse proxy to add CORS headers shifts the cost to the backend. Is this a permanent limitation, or will it be possible to avoid in the future? So the short answer is, I would challenge that this adds cost. For instance, a proxy doesn't need to be running code on a server. So Builder provides a free reverse proxy here. We provide a completely free API that you can use our CDN for this. So there is no cost. So if cost means money, that's solved by that. And you can find other providers. You could probably spin up a Heroku free tier or other Vercel free tier that can power a proxy as well without actual monetary cost. If you mean compute cost, like the idea that we're shifting the computation from the main thread to the backend, that's worth noticing. Proxies do basically nothing. They fetch something, they add a header, and they respond. And a good proxy will cache using something like stale while we validate. So basically, with a good proxy setup, there should be no incremental performance or compute cost or monetary cost. It's literally just a simple way to add a header in cache, and it should be incredibly lightweight. Let me go through. We actually have a lot of questions, so we'll get
Steve,
through.
I want to add something to it, which is that
Please.
Over time, as third-party providers realize that a lot of their customers use Partytown and they have this problem with the proxies, the third parties providers directly themselves should just add the CORS header to their CDN. And when they do that, then you don't need a proxy, right? So like, I think what's going to happen is over time, as third-party providers kind of recognize that this is a thing with other customers, they're just naturally going to add the header, and the problem, I think, over time will just kind of disappear.
Yeah, if I were to, just give a guess, I'd say about half of the, or maybe even more than half, already have the correct CORS headers. It's just in the past, they've never needed them, so why add them, right? So it's kind of a, don't add it if you don't need it, or it's never come up. And so with something like Google Analytics 4, GA4, things like that, all the more modern services are all adding the CORS correctly because it is a CDN. CDNs do have to have CORS. That's just part of how CDNs work. And so, yeah, I think over time, more and more are going to be correctly adding the CDN CORS headers.
Excellent. I really want to sneak in because there were some of the first questions we were asked. And so I want to make sure we've prioritized them still. So I want to change gears just momentarily and answer a couple questions on Quick. And just a reminder for folks, Quick is our front-end framework that, let me see, I've got a nice visual of it somewhere. Looks like this. Components look and feel like React, but they load very fundamentally different. All this stuff turns into simple, lightning fast HTML you deliver, and JavaScript is downloaded only when needed. Performance cost is only added as users interact, making it so that JavaScript performance is effectively eliminated. It's actually a technique that Google has been using for a very long time for Google Search, Gmail, and other products to make those sites so fast, even though they have literally infinite complexity on functionality. Like any search result page might have a weather widget, a buy tickets widget, whatever. And unlike your typical modern website, none of that is ever fetched unless it's needed. So there are two questions that were interesting. They may be worth answering somewhat in tandem. So question one is, what is the Dino story with Quick? And question two is, how does Quick compare to Fresh? So Mishko, want to jump in and answer both of those?
Sure. I was going to actually ask Adam if Adam wants to jump in first.
I can do the Dino part. Yeah. As far as Dino is concerned, what's cool is like what Quick generates it really just generates JavaScript, right? And JavaScript can run in Node, it can run in Dino. It really doesn't matter. And you can kind of say that almost about any framework. And so as far as we already have our stuff designed for Dino, it should be working in any sort of a cloud edge middleware where it's just JavaScript, no Node APIs, and that's all by design to make sure that that runs well. As far as using Dino locally to do development, that's the part that, again, it's designed to handle that. We just haven't put time into that right now. So right now, if you're a Dino developer locally, Quick would not be set up for that. It certainly is internally, but you'd be using Node.js locally. But where it gets shipped to certainly can be run inside of Dino just fine.
The question was comparing it to Fresh.
Yes.
Do you want to take a stab at it?
Are you telling me?
Yeah.
Okay,
Should I take a stab at it?
Yeah, why don't you take a stab at it?
So Fresh is a framework from the Dino folks, and hopefully I don't misspeak, and so Adam, correct me. Fresh underneath it uses Preact, and so what it does is it allows you to set up really tiny islands for your application, and so it's kind of like Astro, maybe on steroids, where it's kind of a more tighter approach. The trouble with this particular approach is that components need to talk to each other. They need to understand each other. They need to know when to wake each other up, etc. And when you have islands architecture, you don't have this particular solution for you. So it's like if you click a button that says, if the button for adding a item to a shopping cart is an island, then how is that button supposed to wake up the shopping cart itself, right? And that's just unsolved, and that is something that is left basically as an exercise to the developer to kind of figure out. The place where Quick becomes different is that, first of all, it solves this problem, but not only it kind of has the island approach, but it actually takes it to an extreme where every single click listener becomes its own island. It's almost like every single callback, like every single hook becomes its own island. And so it's a lot more fine-grained and a lot more integrated into a cohesive system. So, at the very high level, they kind of share the approach of like delaying things. But in the world of islands, you still have to do hydration. It's just the islands are smaller, and so it's cheaper. Whereas in the world of Quick, it's all cohesive and there is no hydration. It's just resumability. Hopefully it kind of helps to clarify.
Yeah, I think that the best comparison is it's very similar to Astro, but with a Dino development environment. So you're using Dino locally to build it.
Yeah, that's basically, and it only supports Preact instead of the other things that Astro supports. But yeah, no, those are both very, very proper definitions. One thing that is worth adding that I knew, but I really realized the other day, that's amazing with Quick. So we have these Quick Builder SDKs, and for those who don't know, the SDKs, builder data is just JSON. The JSON describes, your hero should be here with these props and your products here with those props, whatever. And so you pass that JSON data to an SDK. It's a component for your framework, React, Vue, Quick, whatever, that then turns that into what displays on the page. So instead of a hard-coded template, it is a little bit more dynamic, more flexible, tends to make people happier. And so what's interesting about that is I was thinking, okay, we also will grab analytics, right? People, when they make pages with a low-code tool like ours, they add all these buttons. They want to know, well, who's clicking what button? Or even better, for like an e-commerce use case, if people click this button, did they convert? Like, what is the dollar value of this button? Can you tell me this button made me $1 million and this button made me less? And I'll, run more tests to figure out how to make those better. So with the Builder SDKs and Quick, some components literally only listen to events, just simple listen to click, shoot off one tiny little request. And what's crazy about Quick is the way the component compiles out. This is using what we call the optimizer, a component. The component could be massive. And if all it does is have an event listener that then just fires off an HTTP request, you will never download the component code at all. You can have the world's biggest components, but it'll come to you as HTML. And when you click on a button, you will only download that tiny little bit of JavaScript to respond to the click event and shoot off the HTTP request. You're literally not downloading any other part of your application, any other part of that component. The component you see here, for instance, could have 1,000 more DOM elements, hooks, event listeners, and it gets shredded into these tiny bits that only load as needed. And with prefetching, there's also no delay, which is funny. Adam and Mishko, you might find funny. Mishko, you may already know this. I was talking 2 nights ago to Malti, who created Wiz inside of Google, which is this approach is very, very inspired by. And he was saying at Google, they do what Adam, you've always been a fan of, is aggressive prefetch. Basically, any URLs that are on the page get prefetched immediately. And he was really pushing that point that even if you download all the JavaScript, and keep in mind, Quick is smart enough to know what JavaScript will never run, so that'll never be included under any circumstance. But prefetching all the possible JavaScript means instant responses. And just the fact that you're not executing that is monumental for performance and TTI and stuff like that. So that was funny. And that's where we're experimenting with the eager prefetch, the prefetch on visibility, hover, analytics, all this stuff. So there's a lot of fun stuff there. But I do want to swing back to a good question that was asked that I know you have an answer for, Adam. This is about Partytown again. And also, as a side note, if anybody has to drop off and get to the rest of their day, you're more than welcome to. We're going to keep answering questions, but we're not going to take offense if you have other things to do. And we will keep taking more questions if they come through. But the question here is, if a script is executed inside of Partytown, and that script is adding another script to the head. So the script you put in Partytown calls document.head.append child script. Will the new script that came from the Partytown script also run on the web worker? What's the answer, Adam?
Absolutely. That was, I think that was the original challenge with Partytown when I was building it to start with. And that's because Google Analytics does exactly that. It's almost actually all of them do a lot of that, where they have a very simple script. And then that simple script does more things, adds more scripts. Those guys need to stay inside that same world. And that is a lot of what Partytown's doing, is it's ensuring that it's always, staying within the same context. And so specifically a script, when it's being added, we're able to track that. And we say like, well, I see you're adding a script. Before I even try to throw it over there, we actually know that we need to execute it here. So let's run it already right in the same web worker that we're sitting in.
Yeah, it's
the short answer is yes. Yeah. And and another thing that kind of hit on is that, you got something like Node.js does not have the DOM inside of Node. And so the answer to that is something like JS DOM or Domino, where it basically tries to reinvent and re-implement the entire DOM and how it works in window and all these different events. And it's just about, at least at a minimum, a megabyte of JavaScript to do so. And so if we had done the same, where the web worker doesn't have the DOM, we want to re-implement it and reinvent how it works, we'd have a minimum of a megabyte of code that would completely defeat the purpose of what we're trying to do with Partytown, of trying to reduce JavaScript and run things in web worker. And so the big thing of what Partytown is doing is it really is just receiving commands like, I want document.cookie. And the web worker is like, I have no idea what you're talking about. What is document.cookie? Let's throw this command over to the web worker or over to the main thread, and then see if the main thread has the answer for that, and then return it. And so Partytown really isn't like an implementation of the DOM. It really is just a really fancy proxy that receives any sort of command, which in most cases it has no idea what you're talking about. And it's always just asking the main thread, right? There's this command for document.title. Don't know what I'm talking about. Let's ask the main thread. Main thread's like, oh yeah, it's this thing. Returns the string, and then the string returns it back to the original source that was asking the question. And so a lot of the code, especially Google Analytics, a lot of that code isn't operating with the DOM, but occasionally it does. Occasionally it does do a get attribute or add event listener, things like that. So in those occasions, that's when it then goes like, no idea what you mean. Let's ask the main thread, run it over there, and then get the response and execute it over onto the web worker.
Pretty wild. One thing I was actually dying to ask Adam is, how does Partytown handle like functions and object references, right? Like say I need a reference to a function on the main thread. Does that just not work, or what do we do?
I guess if it's created in the web worker, which in most cases it's going to be. So like some third-party script does window.addEventListener click, right? That code was executed in the context of the web worker. And so we basically give it an ID and store it into a map of just like ID1 equals this function. But then at the same time, we send that over to the main thread of just like, let's run the same code. Let's do window.addEventListener click. And let's give it on the main thread here, let's give it this fake function and say ID1. And so the actual real function, it didn't actually get copied over, right? We just know that like when it actually does run, when this tiny little fake function receives, has been clicked, it then tells the web worker, hey, function one's been clicked. And so then it goes over to the web worker, which again, it's already asynchronous at this point. It's already an event listener, which works very well. And then we say, hey, ID one, let's find the function one, and let's run the exact same serialized event data on this function. And so that's really how a majority of Partytown is working, is by doing that. So the actual functions get to stay on in their context, and the functions that were added on the main thread are tiny little, hey, function one got clicked.
Pretty wild. Adam did like many levels of magic here. Like you can take the initial trick that he came up with and say, hey, that's very magic. But when you go into the details, and I feel like that's how many of these projects become what they are, right? Like it's why when VCs invest, they like to see just very talented teams or whatever, right? People with engineering backgrounds of solving hard problems. Is the first hard problem is always just the first hard problem. There's the next hard problem, the next one. And some of those deep down ones, nobody's ever going to see or care, but it took just as much ingenuity to solve than the rest. And I think we saw that with Partytown.
Yeah. Iframes are probably 90% of the problem. Like getting iframes to work, because each iframe is a different window, it's a different world. And so the web worker doesn't just have a big global window that was associated to it, because then when I run the iframe code, it's going to be the wrong window. And so there's these simulated window contexts for each, the main thread window, and then each of the iframes get their own. And then to have them cross communicate, which is a very like Twitter's embed does that a lot, where it's like one window is referencing the other window, and it's all doing it synchronously. How do I do all those referencing each window where there isn't like a blocking, a deadlock that could happen? And so a lot of the iframe stuff was a big part of Partytown.
It's crazy. I'm going to try and grind through just so we can close out as many of these questions as possible. So here's one. Can we dynamic import modules in Partytown? The example being predicting the next Angular module to load via TensorFlow.js and download in Partytown. If I remember right, that was an experiment that Minko ran on the Angular team, a cool module. I'm gonna give my quick answer. Adam, you let me know if you're in agreement. I think the answer is actually probably not. Now, if you wanted to do just prefetching, so that you want Partytown to just initiate a prefetch so that that module is in the browser cache. So when it's imported from the Angular app on the main thread, that can be done. But it is important to know that what's in JavaScript is in the web worker lands. This idea of seamlessly from your Angular app importing via Partytown, but then running back on the main thread is not really the right mental model to have. It's very much you're in one lane or the other. The third-party script that's just blasting through the web worker, or the main thread application that's there. Am I right about that, Adam?
Yeah, I think that's definitely a case where that code actually is part of your application. You do want that on the main thread. And so if you want to, again, just use it as a way to prefetch the code and have it in the browser cache, and then when you use it, it's sitting there ready, that might be a case for that. But for the most part, you probably want to keep that code, that user code, like your application code, on the main thread.
Yes, exactly. Okay, a couple more here. Where do we want to start? One actually is kind of interesting. So I'm unfamiliar with this exact reference, but how does Partytown interact with CookieBot? So I don't specifically know what CookieBot is, but if a user, I think this question we can answer the second half. If a user denies the tracking via cookies, can the third-party scripts inside the web worker detect the changes in tracking permissions? So I think this is a question of cookie consent. Can Partytown be informed of consents being provided or disallowed?
So to start, I personally haven't tested this, and I don't know if CookieBot works or does not work with Partytown. But that said, really whatever CookieBot is doing, Partytown is doing the identical thing. And so when it says, bring up this pop-up, add this event listener to the user clicked this button, identical stuff is going to happen in Partytown on the main thread, and then send it back to the Partytown. So ideally, it should work just fine, because it really isn't, again, we're not like re-implementing the DOM, we're just passing on exactly what would have happened in the main thread. Let's just do it in the web worker instead. So if they have, the user click cancel, under the hood, the web worker would have had that cancel event listener already had handled, and the code would have ran exactly how it was supposed to run. And so, so short answer is yes, it should work. That said, I haven't tried. I'm not sure, but please try, test it out. Let us know, file an issue if it doesn't.
Exactly. Yeah, I think that's the way to go for this. Next one. This one I think is funny. how do we make sense of the benchmark page on Partytown's docs site? So maybe we could add a little bit more sort of description on the page itself, but Adam, what is this page?
This was kind of more of a testing benchmark for myself. I think the numbers are somewhat meaningless and different for every single computer. But it was more of I'm looping through thousands of DOM operations. I think it's literally thousands and thousands that it's doing the operations, and to see how well it performs when I would do different caching strategies. So atomics being the fastest here, because it really is doing a lot less work to go in between two different threads. And then the service worker has to do the XHR request, and then it has to handle that, and the service worker then do post message to the main thread. So it has to do like an additional hop to what the atomics has to do. And so you can kind of see the benchmark differences between the two different ones. And then to compare it to just main thread code, how fast that should operate, which is lightning fast. And so this also speaks to like Partytown is meant for third-party scripts that run in the background. And it runs them a little bit slower, which I can also argue is a feature, right? You want these scripts to not eat up your resources on the main thread. And so really, yeah, these were benchmarks for myself that as I was building the proxy code to make sure that it was making actual improvements. And the biggest improvement was setters and getters, that really any set doesn't need to do a immediate set on the main thread. So think of a setter like document.cookie. Okay, that's a setter. I'm setting the value to the document. It doesn't have to happen that exact blocking moment. It could be queued up and be sent up. I might then do a set attribute. I might set the body background color. I do a couple different setters at a time. And then when they're done, the moment that I have a getter happen, like, well, a getter has to be blocking. So let's all this queued up, batched up information, let's send them all in one go. So it all happens immediately, which really is what would have happened on the main thread, right? Like all that code would have executed at exact same blocking information. So we're kind of replicating that. So that's kind of the under the hood optimizations that it's doing. And so a lot of that's what these benchmarks were doing was proving that those were actually making a difference or not.
Super cool. The batching and queuing is definitely one that's come up a lot on how does it work. And I think that's extremely neat. And that's what browsers do internally as well, right? That's why we want to try and make sure you're doing all your reads at once and your writes at once, like to the DOM, so that it's not doing that layout thrashing or forcing reflows. And Partytown, essentially same methodology. And so, I mean, maybe the good news for that is in a lot of cases is if the developer is writing the code is mindful of those things, then things should be on average more optimized in Partytown, though it kind of does depend. Like I know React's mindful of it, but React does a lot of reference passing. So still wouldn't recommend using React in it, but you get the idea.
Yeah. And last point is, again, like it might run a little bit slower, but it's also not, Partytown purposely not allowing things to do layout thrashing. So if some third-party script, which is almost all of them, would do all sorts of layout thrashing of read, write, right? That's also competing with your read writes, and it's forcing your app to do a relayout constantly. So when they do it in our sense, in Partytown, when they try doing the read write, it's going to end up inside of a request animation frame. So it's kind of slowing their code down, which is fine, again, to do that, but it also allows your app to stay fast and not be locked up.
That's definitely the rule of thumb. We want your application to be fast. You want your user experience to be good, and we want your analytics to still function, right? And that's sort of the idea. We have one last question, then we'll close out. Oh, there's maybe another one. Yes. Yeah, I think we have two questions that are basically the same. So I'll do the simpler one because I think the other one is asking basically the same thing. How can I test Google Tag Manager events with Partytown? I think, Adam, am I familiar remembering this right? Google Tag Manager has an event debugging tool that the way it expects to work is kind of on their side, not compatible with Partytown out of the box. I remember talking to somebody at an event where I actually suggested having a flag that forces the GTM to run on the main thread when you want to debug and back to Partytown afterwards. I don't know if there's been additional investigation or if there's more of a community thing, because sometimes people file bugs to us that are really another platform and it's more like on their side. But what are your thoughts or experiences with this?
Yeah, if I recall, I mean, it's kind of the same thing of just like, as long as we have a really good proxy, anything and everything should work just fine. And I think what's going on with the Google Tag Manager debug mode. It's just doing a lot of I think there's even sockets happening. It's doing a lot of work under the hood. And so some of those things might not be implemented the last time I looked at it. So I don't know if it's like impossible. It's just that we haven't put enough time into making sure that each of those APIs is passing data back correctly. And so it really comes down to, if we can get any community help to say like, well, this is why it's hung up, or if they're able to provide any additional information of like, because another thing is like that we have to do is we're kind of having to unminify someone else's 500 kilobytes of JavaScript. And so that's very time consuming to try to debug someone else's minified code of what the hang up is. But if we're able to have minimal reproduction cases of like this one DOM operation didn't work, we can recreate that one thing. And then the more we make sure that all the DOM operations work exactly as expected, then the more that we can be assured that like, well, this big script should run because DOM operations it uses are tested and proven. And so you can kind of see that on the Partytown site, all of our different tests that we have that we use internally, but then it's also on the website so you can see kind of how each one of them work.
Awesome. So let me close us out a couple minutes early. I'll scroll back here really quickly. So a couple things for everybody to know. One, thank you for attending. Thank you for asking great questions. Most people stayed the whole time, which I'm shocked about and appreciate as well. Second is we'll be here every week. So we're going to turn this into weekly occurrence we'll be doing. Probably same time and place. If anything changes, we'll tweet it, we'll share it, this and that. But we'd also really love to get your feedback and input to guide sort of what we focus on. There's no point in us talking about things that nobody cares to hear. And we'd like to discuss the things that the group here wants to hear about. So if there's any topics that you'd love for us to cover, we'd love to cover more on how the Builder platform works, how Quick works under the hood, how you combine these interesting tools, what else is really cool out there in the ecosystem, like bring people in to speak. Like one of our favorites is Ryan Carniato, who's just an insane performance person that we just love to talk to all the time. So these are the ideas we have. We'll be doing this weekly. And so please tweet at us, shoot us messages, etc., to give us your input on what you'd like to see. And other than that, thank you so much, everybody, for joining.